At 6:17 a.m. local time, the Caribbean Sea seemed perfectly ordinary. The sky was clear, the water was calm, and visibility stretched all the way to the horizon without interruption. For the sailors on watch aboard a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, it looked like the kind of morning that usually passes quietly. Everything appeared routine, controlled, and predictable. Then the radar display changed. Inside the carrier's Combat Information Center, a surface contact appeared to the west. Moments later, another one showed up, then several more. In total, 6 vessels were identified, all belonging to the Venezuelan Navy. Their profiles were clear: patrol ships and smaller naval combat vessels operating under their national flag. Their presence alone was not unusual. Venezuelan vessels are known to operate in the region. What drew immediate attention was the way they were moving. The ships were not scattered across the water. They were pulling closer together. Each vessel adjusted its course within seconds of the others, their wakes curving inward as if all 6 were being guided toward the same point. Their speed increased almost at the same time, staying within a narrow and coordinated range. This was not casual navigation. It did not look accidental. It looked planned. The distance began closing faster than standard maritime practice would normally allow. On the bridge, the officer of the deck was informed immediately. Range, bearing, speed, and movement patterns were all recorded. The carrier did not change course. It did not increase speed. It did not send any dramatic signal. That was deliberate. U.S. Navy procedure does not favor rushed reactions. It favors clarity, control, and documented facts. At 18 nautical miles, the Venezuelan vessels kept coming. At 15, their formation became tighter. At 12, projected closest point calculations began dropping below comfortable safety margins. Still, there was no radio call. That silence mattered. In professional encounters at sea, communication is expected. A basic bridge-to-bridge message can quickly clarify intentions and reduce the chance of confusion. But no such message came. The lack of communication created its own kind of pressure. It suggested that someone had chosen to let movement, distance, and formation speak instead. Inside the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere shifted, not into panic, but into sharp focus. Sensor operators tracked every course adjustment. Electronic specialists quietly logged emissions. The ship's combat systems continued building a complete tactical picture, contact by contact, second by second. 6 Venezuelan naval vessels, 1 U.S. carrier. No explanation, no warning, no radio traffic. From the outside, nothing looked dramatic. No urgent announcements echoed across the deck. No aircraft launched. Sailors continued their work beneath the rising sun. But that calm did not mean nothing was happening. It meant discipline. A U.S. aircraft carrier does not need to react loudly to pressure. It observes it, measures it, and records it. At 9 nautical miles, 1 Venezuelan ship moved slightly ahead of the others, its bow angled inward. Another vessel mirrored that movement from the opposite side. The formation began to look less like a standard transit pattern and more like a loose arc forming around the carrier. It was not a complete surrounding movement, but the direction was clear enough. That moment was entered into the log. Coordinated maneuvering observed. The rules of engagement remained unchanged. No direct action had taken place, but intent is not always communicated through words. Sometimes it is communicated through timing, formation, and silence. Above the carrier, the sky remained empty. No aircraft passed overhead, no helicopters lifted from the deck. That absence was also intentional. Every response was being measured, timed, and kept under control. At sea, tension does not always begin with dramatic action. It often begins with distance, with silence, with several vessels closing in together without explanation. By 6:29 a.m., the Venezuelan ships were close enough for hull numbers to be seen through long-range optics. Activity on their decks was visible. Crew members were topside. Their movements looked purposeful. Still, no message came. Still, they did not change course. The carrier held steady. This no longer looked like a coincidence. It did not resemble drift, miscalculation, wind, or current. 6 vessels do not align, accelerate, and converge in that way by chance. Someone had given an order, and now the U.S. Navy was watching quietly, completely, and with every system recording. Because when a boundary is tested at sea, the first question is not how quickly to respond. The first question is who loses patience first. From the outside, the carrier appeared almost indifferent to what was happening around it. It continued on course, moving through the Caribbean at a constant speed, its massive flight deck calm beneath the morning light. To someone unfamiliar with naval operations, the calm might have looked like hesitation. But to anyone who understands how carrier operations work, it meant something very different: control. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical picture grew more detailed with every passing second. Surface contacts were stabilized, verified, and continuously updated. Each Venezuelan vessel received its own track number. Speed, heading, course changes, and movement history were plotted in real time. Nothing was guessed. Nothing was assumed. Every piece of data was recorded. Electronic warfare specialists stayed in passive mode, listening rather than transmitting. Radar emissions from the approaching vessels were cataloged, search patterns, power levels, sweep intervals, and any changes in behavior. In modern naval encounters, information is power. And the closer another force comes, the more it reveals about itself. The carrier still did not issue a warning. That restraint was deliberate. Under the rules of engagement, warnings are not automatic. They are tools used at the right moment. Sending one too early can increase tension when the situation still has room to cool down. By remaining silent, the carrier placed the burden of intent on the approaching vessels. If they continued closing in, that decision would be theirs alone. Beyond the carrier, the rest of the strike group quietly adjusted its internal posture. Escorting destroyers held formation with careful spacing. There was no obvious movement meant to signal concern, but every ship was positioned to respond if needed. The group's defensive layers across the surface, air, and underwater environment remained intact. Far above the horizon, airborne sensors were already helping shape the wider picture. An E-2D Hawkeye, operating on station, extended the carrier's radar awareness far beyond what the ship could see alone. From altitude, it monitored not only the 6 Venezuelan vessels, but the surrounding space as well, looking for aircraft, other surface contacts, or anything that might make the situation more complicated. Still, no fighters launched from the deck. That was also a message. Launching aircraft too early could suggest concern. Holding them back communicated confidence. The carrier was not acting surrounded. It was not behaving like a ship under immediate pressure. It was watching, measuring, and letting the other side reveal its intentions. At 7 nautical miles, the Venezuelan ships slowed slightly, then adjusted course again. They kept the pressure on without fully committing. It was a classic gray zone move. Push far enough to test the response, but not far enough to justify an obvious counteraction. These kinds of maneuvers are designed to provoke mistakes. They try to rush the other side into a visible move that can later be framed as overreaction. But the U.S. Navy does not rush. Every maneuver by the Venezuelan ships was time-stamped. Every turn was measured. High-resolution optics tracked deck activity. Video feeds captured hull markings, positions, and crew movements. This was no longer just a tense moment at sea. It was becoming a fully documented event, one that could be reviewed frame by frame if necessary. That mattered because modern naval confrontations are not judged only in the moment. They are analyzed later in command centers, diplomatic channels, and public narratives. Evidence shapes the story, and the story can shape what happens next. The carrier continued ahead. No sirens, no public warning, no visible change in posture, just a steady ship moving through open water, while its systems did exactly what they were designed to do. The Venezuelan commanders may have expected a different reaction, a radio call, a course change, perhaps a visible show of force. Instead, they received silence and patience. And in this kind of encounter, patience is not weakness, it is pressure. Because the longer the standoff continued, the more information was collected. The more information was collected, the more intent became visible. And the more intent became visible, the fewer options remained for anyone hoping to create a dramatic outcome. By the time the Venezuelan ships realized that their movements were not forcing the carrier to react, the balance of pressure had already started to change. The weight was no longer on the U.S. Navy, it was on them. From the Venezuelan side, this operation was likely never about winning a direct confrontation. It was about creating a moment, a visible, controlled encounter that could be presented as resistance. 6 naval vessels moving close to a U.S. aircraft carrier in the Caribbean. No dramatic action, no open clash, just distance, pressure, and cameras waiting for a reaction. This was gray zone maneuvering. Venezuela's Navy understands the imbalance at sea. A carrier strike group is not something it can realistically outmatch, outmaneuver, or overpower in a conventional contest. But that was not the point. The goal was psychological and political, not purely tactical. Force the carrier to change course, prompt a warning broadcast, trigger a fighter launch, create anything that could be shown later as proof that the United States had been pushed into reacting. Because in modern confrontations, perception can matter almost as much as firepower. The 6 ships continued their controlled approach, keeping enough separation to avoid an obvious collision risk, while still narrowing the carrier's maneuvering space. One vessel pushed slightly forward. Another mirrored the movement from the opposite side. It was not a full surrounding formation yet, but it was clearly moving in that direction. Each adjustment appeared calculated to test limits without clearly crossing them. The radio silence was no accident. Without a single word spoken over the radio, every movement could be shaped later into whatever story served best. If the carrier changed direction, it could be portrayed as backing away. If aircraft launched, it could be described as an unnecessary display of force. Either result would support the same objective. The calculation was simple. Pressure was supposed to create a visible reaction. In similar encounters around the world, close approaches often produce immediate signs of concern. Radio messages, defensive course changes, aircraft rising from the deck. Those moments travel fast. They become images, headlines, and political talking points. They make the decision to move in close look successful. Venezuela's planners appeared to be relying on that familiar pattern. But this time, the pattern did not appear. At 6 nautical miles, nothing changed. At 5, the carrier still held its course. At 4, there was still no broadcast, no sudden turn, no dramatic signal from the deck. Instead of escalation, there was calm. And that calm was uncomfortable. On the Venezuelan bridges, officers would have been watching for any sign that the carrier felt pressure. A small course correction, a change in speed, a visible adjustment in posture, anything. But what they saw was a ship moving as though time was on its side. A ship that did not appear trapped, a ship that did not behave as if the pressure mattered. That created a problem. Pressure only works when the other side shows that it feels it. One Venezuelan vessel briefly increased speed again, moving ahead of the group to tighten the angles. The adjustment was small, but its meaning was clear. It was meant to reduce the carrier's available maneuvering space and push the situation closer to a decision point. In many encounters, a move like that would bring an immediate radio call. Still, nothing came. No message, no course change, no visible reaction. What Venezuela had misread was not American capability. It was American discipline. U.S. naval procedure in moments like this is built around managing tension, not reacting emotionally to it. The carrier was not waiting helplessly to see what would happen. It was allowing the Venezuelan formation to create its own record. Every maneuver, every adjustment, every silent choice was being captured by multiple sensors from multiple directions. The longer the Venezuelan ships remained close, the harder it became to describe their movements as accidental or harmless. Intent was slowly becoming visible, and once intent becomes visible, options begin to narrow. The moment of realization likely came when the Venezuelan commanders understood they were no longer drawing out a response. They were revealing themselves. The absence of an American reaction was not uncertainty. It was calculation. Without a visible overreaction from the carrier, there would be no dramatic footage to use later, no forced turn, no sudden launch to portray as intimidation. What remained instead was a clean record of 6 Venezuelan naval vessels pressing in on a carrier that never changed course. That record would not work in their favor. The tactic depended on making the United States move first. When that did not happen, the entire idea began to weaken. Gray zone pressure loses much of its value when the other side refuses to validate it. And somewhere inside that tightening formation, the balance quietly shifted. Because if nothing changed soon, Venezuela would face a different problem entirely. Not how to increase pressure, but how to pull back without appearing to be the side that blinked. The next shift did not come from a radio message or a dramatic surface maneuver. It came from above. Without any announcement on open channels, the air picture around the carrier began to change. What had seemed like an empty sky only moments before was no longer empty at all. High above the formation, beyond what sailors could easily see with the naked eye, the carrier strike group quietly expanded its awareness. The first sign was subtle. Radar coverage became sharper. Tracking data grew cleaner and more precise. An E-2D Hawkeye, already operating in the area, adjusted its orbit to place the developing encounter more directly under its watch. From altitude, it could see the full picture. 6 Venezuelan naval vessels, their spacing, their headings, their movement patterns, and the open water around them. The carrier was no longer simply observing the encounter, it was shaping the geometry of it. Still, the flight deck remained calm. Then the helicopter line came alive. 2 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters lifted smoothly from the carrier's deck, rising into the morning air without urgency or spectacle. Their rotors carved steady circles overhead as they moved outward. At first, they did not fly directly toward the Venezuelan vessels. Instead, they shifted laterally, taking positions designed to observe rather than confront. This was not a dramatic show. It was a quiet statement of awareness. From their higher vantage points, the helicopter sensors began working immediately. Optical systems focused on hull numbers. Infrared cameras monitored engine heat and deck movement. Activity aboard the Venezuelan ships was now being recorded in high resolution, with time, position, and movement all linked together. There was no aggressive pass, no threatening maneuver, no attempt to provoke, just presence. And presence from above changes the entire atmosphere. These were not patrol aircraft simply passing through the area. They were part of the carrier's reach, positioned calmly near the edge of the formation and watching every movement from above. Almost immediately, the Venezuelan formation began to loosen. One ship eased back from its forward position, reducing speed by a few knots. Another widened its turn, increasing the distance to the side. The arc that had been tightening around the carrier slowly began to open. Inside the Combat Information Center, the change was clear. Speed readings dropped. Headings shifted outward. Closest point calculations improved minute by minute. Still, no one spoke over the radio. There was no need. The message was already clear. The carrier strike group had full awareness of the situation, and it had chosen this exact moment to make that awareness visible. Above the scene, the Seahawk crews held steady orbits. They did not chase. They did not descend aggressively. They simply watched. In modern naval encounters, observation can be more powerful than confrontation. It removes uncertainty, it leaves little room for excuses, and it makes every decision visible. Within minutes, the Venezuelan ships were no longer closing. At 5 nautical miles, the lead vessel adjusted outward. At 6, another followed. By 7, the approach had stopped completely. What had started as pressure now looked like hesitation, and hesitation at sea can spread quickly. The remaining Venezuelan vessels gradually followed the same pattern, opening distance and breaking the coordinated shape that had defined the encounter. The arc dissolved into a loose line. Speed differences appeared. The synchronized movement that had suggested intent was gone. From the carrier's deck, nothing dramatic was visible. Sailors continued their routines. Aircraft remained parked. The ship never changed course. But the attempted pressure had ended. No shots were fired. No warnings were issued. No orders were shouted across open channels. The encounter ended not with a dramatic climax, but with a quiet reversal. Once air assets entered the picture, the calculation changed. Proximity at sea can create pressure, but visibility from above removes uncertainty, and uncertainty is the main shield gray zone tactics rely on. Once that shield disappeared, Venezuela had no clean way to continue the maneuver. The carrier strike group had not escalated. It had simply revealed how much it could see, and that was enough. As distance opened and the Venezuelan ships turned away, the helicopters headed back toward the carrier. Their role was complete. The skies slowly returned to emptiness. The sea settled again into its calm, almost deceptive stillness. But the lesson had already been delivered, quietly, precisely, and without a single round fired. By the time the final Venezuelan vessel changed course away from the carrier, the Caribbean looked much like it had an hour earlier. Wide, calm, peaceful on the surface. To anyone who had not been watching closely, it might have seemed as if nothing important had happened. In reality, everything had. No missiles launched, no warnings were broadcast, no jets roared from the deck in a dramatic response. And still, the outcome was clear. The carrier had not moved. The strike group had not flinched. The formation that arrived with pressure had left without control of the moment. That contrast was the lesson. Modern naval power is often misunderstood as pure firepower. Missiles, aircraft, explosions, and dramatic footage. But one of the most important capabilities a Navy can have is the ability to manage tension, choose when not to act, and make that restraint look intentional rather than passive. The U.S. Navy did not shape the encounter by forcing Venezuela away through aggression. It did it by denying Venezuela the reaction the maneuver depended on. No warning call to replay, no forced turn to describe as retreat, no dramatic footage to circulate. What remained was a simple record. 6 Venezuelan naval vessels closed in on a U.S. aircraft carrier in international waters. The carrier maintained course. Air assets deployed calmly. The Venezuelan vessels eventually disengaged. That sequence did not need embellishment. For Venezuela, the result was a quiet failure. The pressure tactic depended on drawing the United States into a visible response that could be turned into a story of resistance. Instead, that story weakened the longer the maneuver continued. The more time the ship spent near the carrier, the more clearly their behavior was documented. And once that documentation existed, pulling away became the only practical option. For the United States, the message was just as clear, even though it was never spoken aloud. A carrier strike group does not need to escalate to dominate a situation. Its presence, layered systems, and disciplined command structure can be enough. The lack of visible reaction was not hesitation. It was confidence. This is how many modern naval encounters are decided, not through chaos, but through restraint. Every system aboard the carrier had a role. Sensors collected data. Operators recorded behavior. Commanders measured timing, distance, and intent. Air assets appeared only when their presence would have the greatest effect, not when it would create the most dramatic image. Most importantly, no line was crossed that required anything more. Because once escalation begins, it cannot always be controlled. The real danger in encounters like this is not the pressure itself. It is miscalculation. One unnecessary maneuver, one emotional response, one decision made for optics instead of control. This time, none of that happened. The sea stayed quiet because, in the end, both sides allowed it to stay quiet. But encounters like this are not random. They are signals, tests of posture, patience, and perception. Each one becomes part of a growing record that commanders, analysts, and governments study closely. The next time these ships meet, the memory of this moment will already be there. Who held course? Who stayed silent? Who changed direction first? That memory will shape decisions before radar screens ever light up again. So the question that remains is not only whether this could have become more serious, it is how often restraint can be trusted in waters where pressure tactics are becoming more common. Because in an age when a single mistake can be seen around the world in seconds, the strongest move may still be the one that looks invisible from the outside.